Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Alhamdulillah. Wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ba'd. So as Sheikh Ammar mentioned, I'm going to talk about the concept of gender identity and how it transformed from gender roles to gender identity. If you go back throughout history, you find that pretty much throughout all societies in the world, gender was not a choice. Gender is something that everyone understood intuitively, naturally. A little child can look at a person and say, this is a male or this is a female. It was not very difficult. And from a scientific perspective, from a biological perspective, when a child is born, you look at their private parts. And if they've got the male private part, they're male. They got the female private part, they're female. And then we began to learn a little bit more about science. And it became a little bit more sophisticated. So we learned that actually beyond that, inside, you have gonads. And if they're born with male gonads, then they're male. Female gonads, they're female. And then we began to discover a little bit more about the human body by the grace of Allah, by the mercy of Allah. And then you realize that in human bodies, there are these little things called cells. And we have about 100 trillion of them inside of our body. And inside the cell, there's a nucleus. And inside the nucleus, there's these things called chromosomes. And they're either X's or Y's. So if somebody's got the XY chromosome in there, they're male. If someone's got the XX chromosome, they're female. And usually, you wouldn't even need to go down to this level in most cases, because you could tell who is male and who is female. Now fast forward to the 1960s in the United States of America. There were psychologists who were experimenting with human beings. They were performing lobotomies, cutting out part of the brain. They were doing electroshock therapy to see how human beings react to different things. And one of the things that they were promoting was this idea is that, is gender really something intrinsic naturally to people? Or is it something that is a product of social conditioning, where you could actually go and modify and change a person from being male or female if you raise them in a different way? So there was a very prominent psychologist by the name of Dr. John Money. And he was a psychologist at Johns Hopkins University. And he believed, genuinely believed, that gender is a 100% social construct. That was his religion. Like his internal beliefs is almost like a religion in and of itself. And one day, a child was presented to him. This child was known as John Reamer. And John, when he was born as a baby, they accidentally cut off most of his penis. And they said, you know what? You should go to this Dr. John Money because he's a specialist in the field and he can help you. And guess what he did? He saw this as a perfect experimental opportunity. He convinced the parents of John to cut off his entire penis, to cut off his testicles, and to raise him as a girl, making sure that he's going to wear dresses, making sure that he's going to play with dolls even when he doesn't want to. Do you know why he chose this kid out of all the other kids that something like this could happen to? Because he had a twin brother. There were two boys and they were twins. And Dr. John wanted to see what's going to happen when we have two identical twins and we try to transition one of them and we try to change one of them into making them into a girl. Let's see and let's analyze what happens. So he had, this was really sick stuff. 1966, he was having, he was having the two brothers, but he changed one of them into a girl. He was having them perform sexual experiments on each other, taking pictures of them, publishing it in medical journals to convince the rest of the world that my belief about gender is correct. I have been able to change a boy into a girl, and the parents are on board, and we've raised them as a girl. But what actually happened to this boy, Reamer? He was growing up, and he said, I always felt something is not right about me. I didn't want to play with the dolls. I didn't want to wear dresses. I was telling my parents that I feel like I'm a boy inside, but they said, no, you're not. This is the way you were. He got bullied in school. People would make fun of him. He went into suicidal depression. Finally, when he was 15 years old, his parents told him the truth. This is what the doctor told us to do, and we did it, and we're sorry. What did this boy do? At the age of 15, he re-identified as a boy and said, I'm a boy. I'm going to get my breast removed because they did all this stuff to him. I want to get a penis reconstructed in me. I'm going to get testosterone injected into me. And he said, I'm going to live like a man. He got married. He adopted 3 children. He tried to live his best like a man because he was a man. But he committed suicide a few years later. And there's a very important lesson that we learn from something like this. The lesson is that this is how the first gender reassignment surgery hospital in America was produced at Johns Hopkins in 1965. By performing experiments on people based upon an underlying belief that some psychologists had that gender is not intrinsic, it's not part of the fitrah, it's not part of your natural disposition, but it's something that you can toy around with, it's something that you can play with. But the reality, brothers and sisters, is that you're playing with fire when you try to understand something that is not in the way that Allah has created people. And that's a very important lesson that we need to learn, because this is something that is harming people. This was 1965. Fast forward to 2010, what do we see? I'm from California, where Tupac was from. What do we see? We see all of a sudden the idea, the dictionary definition of gender starts changing. Gender and sex used to be synonymous, and now the dictionary definition changes. Then bathrooms start changing. And I was so happy to see in the convention center, I was just walking past the bathroom and I still see a male figure. And I see the woman, women's sign for the women's bathroom with the dress and all that. Maybe the dress is a little bit short for Islamic standards, but we take what we can get, right? At least to see that, it's like, wow, people still understand that there are these 2 genders. It's nice to see that. But you don't see that, you see the change start taking place in 2010. And then what happens? 2013, you go to Wikipedia and you look up gender and you find that there's 107 genders listed in Wikipedia. Among the genders, omnigender. Among the genders, genderless. What does genderless mean? No gender. What does omnigender mean? All genders. So it's 106 of all the other ones? Basically, gender lost its understanding, it lost its value as a component of actually having some substantial meaning. And this is the world in which we're living today. And what we need to understand is that's where we are, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has actually warned us about this a long time ago. He talked about shaitan, and shaitan is saying, and this is being quoted in the Quran, it says, وَلَآمُرَنَّهُمْ فَلَيُغَيِّرُنَّ خَلْقَ اللَّهِ. Shaitan says, I'm going to command them and they're going to change the creation of Allah. Because Allah mentions in so many places in the Quran, He says, I have created people from a male and a female. I have made them into males and females. And when you try to go around that and say, you know what, we're going to redefine and reinvent the concept of gender, we fall into a big problem. We fall into a trap. And that's why the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, he cursed the people who are men and they tried to imitate women, and the women who tried to imitate men. That's pretty strong language. Why did he curse them? And by the way, this is not new. This is also in Christianity. It's in Judaism. In Deuteronomy chapter 22, verse 5, the same thing is mentioned. There shall be no man's item on a woman, and a man shall not wear a woman's garment, for anyone who does these things is abhorrent to Yahweh your God. But it's not being understood. The message is still not getting through. So we as Muslims, we have a responsibility, because we're one of the last few people standing on an issue like this who's saying, you know what? There is a male and there's a female. There's a difference between a male and a female. God created us into males and females. And we should act like that. And we should understand what that is. And we should understand that while there's some overlap between the roles, there is Also, some things which men do and that women don't do, and some things which women do and men don't do. And when it comes to clothing, there is certain type of clothing that men will wear and women shouldn't wear that. And there's certain type of clothing like high heels and a dress and lipstick and nail polish that men should not be wearing. And there are people in our community today who are trying to push the envelope and saying, well, we're going to go ahead and push these norms out because we believe that gender is a completely social construct, just like that Dr. Money believed in the 1960s. And this is extremely dangerous. It's extremely dangerous for a few reasons. Number one, it goes against common sense. Children can understand, and the cumulative history of humankind has shown that there's a difference between males and females throughout history. And children get that and they understand it very clearly. But where do you draw the line? If somebody thinks that they're a dog, if somebody thinks that they're a cat, and they say that they genuinely feel that way, are we going to say, you know what? We must believe and validate people's feelings because feelings can never be wrong. Is this the approach we want to take? Because this happened in America. In a school, this is happening quite a bit actually, when roll is being called, some students will actually meow instead of saying here, present. And there was a girl, she identified as a cat, and her parents validated her and said, you better treat my girl like a cat, girl like a cat. And in fact, the parents said, we want a litter box. It's not a joke. We want a litter box installed into the bathroom because my daughter is a cat. And therefore, she should be able to use a litter box rather than a toilet because she's not human. Where do you draw the line? Somebody has schizophrenia and they're hearing voices. Are the voices real? In their mind and in their head, they're real. But outside to the rest of the world, they're not real. There is a condition known as somatoparaphrenia, where somebody has a delusion where they think their own limb that's been paralyzed is not part of their body. You can look it up. And in the medical literature, it says very clearly that this is a delusion. The person's got an arm. And they say, yeah, I know this arm is attached to me, but it's not really mine. Just trust me. And they genuinely believe that. And you feel sorry for them. You feel bad. But you got two choices in front of you. If somebody is hearing voices inside their head, if somebody believes that a limb that's attached to their body is not actually their limb, you can either validate them and say, you know what we're going to do? We're going to validate you and say you're absolutely right, and we're going to ask everyone else around you to adjust to that reality. Or we can say, you know what? This is a really difficult struggle for you, and I understand it, and I'm really sorry what you're going through. But the reality is the reality. We need to get you help somehow to be able to get out of this. And the reality is that we live in a society today where there is so much pressure to conform to this radical gender identity movement that you must accept it, you must validate it 100%, that it's very hard for people to resist. And I'll conclude with this. Our brother, Dave Chappelle, a famous comedian, he's Muslim. He admits that he's not the best Muslim, especially when it comes to his language that he uses, but he's a Muslim. And he tells a story when he was being interviewed by Oprah. He said, one day I showed up to a movie that we were filming, and they put a dress inside the thing. They said, Dave, you're going to put this dress on and you're going to pretend to be a prostitute. And he said, you know what? He said, I'm not doing that. And they said, come on, Dave, it's going to be great. You should. All the greats have done it. It's going to be really good for you. It's going to be really funny, and we're going to make this act and everything. And he says, no, I'm not doing that. I don't want to do that. And they came and put pressure on him and pressure on him. And it's interesting. He made a very interesting statement. He said they take the most masculine of men and they try to push this on them to put him in the forefront of everybody else, to put a dress on him, so they can emasculate the people who are even viewed as being more masculine, as a role model of masculinity, maybe sometimes positive, sometimes negative, at some level, in order to emasculate them even more. That is the pressure that we're feeling, brothers and sisters. We need to go back to the principles of the Quran and Sunnah. We need to go back to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaches us, that He created the male and He created the female. وَلَيْسَ الذَّكَرُ كَالْأُنثَى, and the male is unlike the female. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to wake us up from the delusion that we're living in when it comes to gender ideology. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to keep us firm on the Quran and Sunnah, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us both the confidence and the wisdom to be able to clarify this to the rest of the world and the rest of society. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.